Okay, welcome everybody to Through an Irish Emigrant's Eyes. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you all here at Lubber Run in room 126 and also out there in Zoom land from the comfort of your homes. We're having a great time here. We've got some people in green, and I'm sure at home we'll have some people in green. I am Sheila Budoff. I'm with Arlington County's Office of 55 Plus Programs, and I'm very excited about this program and delighted to welcome all of you, both here in person and on Zoom. So today we're going to learn about Irish immigration to the US in the 19th century from the perspective of an Irishman on his journey to New York. Here's somebody coming into the waiting room. From the perspective of an Irishman on his journey to New York, then going on to the Midwest and then the Great Plains. I'm delighted that Jon Vrana is here with us today by virtue of Zoom to bring to life the story of Irish immigration to America in the 19th century. Jon is a local historian, historical interpreter, and president of the Burke Historical Society. He is highly regarded for his knowledge of local Virginia history, and he speaks widely. He is also well known for his portrayals of historical figures like Lieutenant Colonel Silas Burke, for whom Burke is named, Henry Vandergrift, the chief engineer and general superintendent of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, and others. Today, he's going to dramatize a hypothetical but typical Irishman who came to this country in the 19th century. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton on to Jon Vrana, and we will have time for questions at the end. So please hold your questions, or for those of you in Zoom land, please enter them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. So welcome, Jon.
Well, thank you very much. Nice to be here. Happy St. Patrick's Day, as you said. It's a wonderful thing to be able to give this program on St. Patrick's Day. The individual that you see on the screen is not a hypothetical creature. That's actually Christopher Turner, who is my great-great-grandfather, and who is the one that I'm speaking of on this program today. We'll start out in Ireland, and we'll basically track his travels to America, and we'll see where we get to. So the Irish have a real rich history, and I could give another talk on the pre-immigration. They had quite the challenges with the English and with the Scots, and with the Scots taking over Northern Ireland, and that conflict lasts until today. So we'll move on though. Here's the country of Ireland, this island, surrounded by water. And here's the many ways that the Irish immigrated. The Irish immigrated to America by way of a number of different ports, primarily New York, but also Philadelphia, Baltimore, Charleston, New Orleans, and a number of others, as well as to South Africa, Australia, and a number of other sites. Early in the 1800s, the Irish were fairly wealthy, educated Irish that were coming to America, fought in the War of Independence, the War of 1812, other things, and were employed in in quite a number of skilled laborers, was really until the 1840s where the group of people that immigrated kind of changed to a poorer class. This gentleman's not poor, but he's not of the wealthy, rich class. This is more typical of the Irish that came across on the ships. In Ireland, most of the poor lived in stone or thatch housing, very, very poor conditions. Inside, the walls would be mud, the floors would be mud, often with holes in the floor where water would catch and accumulate into pits of mud and water. The walls and the roofs would often be thatch on the outside. Here you have a woman doing a typical Irish thing, that is digging potatoes. The Irish had a variety of different foods that they ate prior to the early 1800s, but then it seemed like they devolved into eating potatoes. So they had small land holdings, and it was the small land holdings were particularly well served to grow the potatoes. Here you can see inside one of these homes with the fireplace and the hearth. And here's the potato holdings. Well, in 1846, 1847, the potato famine hit, the Great Famine hit. There had been a number of other famines throughout the years, but this one was particularly bad. One day, they were driving around and the fields were green and lush and wonderful. And the next day, they woke up and went outside, and all the fields were rotten. The leaves were black, and the potatoes were rotten, and just not much left to save. They got out there and dug and tried to save what they could, but there wasn't much to save. It caused a number of people to commit suicide or die for other means. The local pastor or minister would stop by to try to console these people. But finally, people would say they'd had enough. They'd had enough of the famine. They'd had enough of the conflict between the Irish Catholics and the Anglican Church, which was the Church of England, and the Scots Presbyterians fighting, and it was such that for the Irish, education was against the law, and the Irish had to pay tithes to the Catholics, even though they weren't Catholic, to support the Catholic priests. They'd had enough of that, so they finally decided that they were going to go and travel to America. Before they traveled to America, they had an interesting thing. They'd have an Irish wake or an American wake built on the concept of an Irish wake. An Irish wake was held when a person dies. All their friends would gather and they would sing and dance and play music and have a celebration of that person's life. Well, an American wake was a party to celebrate that person's life that was going to America, because they figured they'd never see that person again. So they'd better celebrate their life while they had him. The other thing that bothered them is this was all on a landowner's basis. Landowners owned the land and rented the land out to people, and continued to gather rent and lease money and all. Sometimes they had to force the people that lived in these homes out, and they bust holes into the walls and into the roofs. Here you can see them using a log to slam a hole into the side of a house, forcing the people to leave their homes, burning the homes down. So they head on into the local town, probably Dublin, to look for a ship to head towards America. Well, the first challenge that they had was to pick a good ship to travel on. Most of the ships that traveled there were three-masted schooners, like these you see here. And what you have to remember is it's not dissimilar to the slave trade, in that with the slave trade, they would carry over goods going one direction and then carry slaves back the other direction. Well, here they carry goods going one direction and carry immigrants the other direction. Most of the immigrants that traveled across, well, you'd get your ticket to travel. In this case here, there's actually an advertisement for laborers. They were looking in America for laborers, and this was a great thing in that you perhaps could know where you were going to go and what you were going to do before you ever got on the ship. So here they are on the quay, or the they're at the where the ships are. This is a quay here. Waving farewell, boarding the ship. And this is a cutout of a typical ship, and you'd have a number of different layers. The top layer there, that's where the wealthy people that had a lot of money could buy tickets and board there and have nice accommodations. But most of the immigrants that went across to America were in the lower parts of the ship, where the accommodations were not very nice. So when they finally picked the ship that they were on or wanted to go on, and that was a bit of a challenge in that sometimes the nicest looking ships were not the best ships. What I mean by that is the shipmaster would often paint the ships and make them look really nice, and yet the accommodations were very poor. The other way is sometimes the ship captain didn't care that much about how his ship looked, but he took good care of the immigrants. So, you just couldn't quite tell which ship was the best ship to go on. Here's an example of the kinds of food that would be that they would carry with them to accommodate their nourishment for the several weeks that it took to get across to America. Now this is the top part, and this is the saloon, and these are the wealthier people, and you can see that they had nice accommodations, the table there in the middle of the hallway to sit at. They had individual compartments that were locked that they could unlock and go in and sleep. So these were very nice accommodations. Well, those were nice accommodations, but as you went down farther into the ship, the accommodations got less and less nice, particularly during times of storms. You can see this storm and hear the effect that it has on these poor immigrants. Also, oftentimes in the holes of the ships there, you would have disease. And here an example of cholera and typhus. Ship sickness was the most common illness, and seasickness. They would get seasickness, but usually once you've gone through that about 3 or 4 days, you've gotten over that and you're doing okay. Your system is kind of adjusted to the swaying of the ship. But these other ones, cholera, typhus, and ship sickness, those were much more terminal. Here's in the steerage, this is where the poorest of the poor traveled, and you can see that their accommodations are not very good. They'd sleep in those wooden, I guess I can call them beds, but they're really kind of little areas there that they'd sleep in, probably 2 or 3 or 4 to a section there. Here's another picture you can kind of see of those accommodations. I like this picture because you can just see the general feeling of people that are traveling across to America. They're not particularly happy, pretty sullen sort of individuals. I like this one. This family is looking at Ireland for probably the last time in their life that they'll see their home country with their children. And then their grandmother just can't take it, and she turns away. She's so sad that she's leaving the home country. Now, when you leave Ireland to immigrate, there's a couple of different things you must think about. If you're fairly well-to-do, or if you're fairly skilled in some craft or some labor, you're better off staying in Ireland. If you're poor and you have no skills, you're unskilled, then maybe you do all right with traveling to America. But the picture had been painted that America was a land of riches and gold and streets of gold, and that didn't turn out quite to be true, but that's what these people believed at the time. Now, not everybody that went on these ships was supposed to go on the ships. And here in this case, they're searching for a stowaway that is hidden in the baggage and all. They find the stowaway, and if they're still in port, they'll carry them on, off the ship. And if they're under sail and they find the stowaway, then oftentimes they'd land on a deserted island and leave the stowaway on a deserted island to have to fend for themselves. Well, I told you about the illness, and along with the illness comes death. And oftentimes there are as many as 10% or more people died on the ship under sail. And the way they would bury them is they would wrap them in muslin, tie their feet with rope, tie their head with rope, and then put them on a board, put a flag, usually the British flag, over top the body. Then they'd lift up the board from the inside, and the body would slide off into the ocean and for a burial at sea. It's a very sad occasion for those people to see that and hear that final splash as the body falls into the water and sinks under the ocean. Finally, they, after several weeks of being under sail, they approach the New York harbor. And there you can see to the left of in the picture is Castle Garden. It's the round building with the flag, the farthest left. That's Castle Garden. That precedes Ellis Island. Ellis Island didn't come about until the 1890s, and Castle Garden came into effect in the 1850s. So anybody that has relatives that came over here in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s, they would have come into Castle Garden. So they landed at Castle Garden. You can just see the variety of people that came in here from Ireland and from other places. One of the first things they did was to get in line for food. Here they are feeding them, feeding the newly arrived immigrants. And here you have just the collection on the quay of the newly arrived immigrants. This is a aerial picture of Manhattan Island, and down there at the lower left, you can see the round building. That's Castle Garden, and the rest is New York, Manhattan as it stood in the 1860s, 1850s. I show this because earlier in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, Lafayette, Colonel Lafayette, stopped there at Castle Garden, and they had a celebration for him. Later on, they used Castle Garden. Before it was Castle Garden, it was Castle Clinton, which was a military fort, and then that became a place of entertainment. And then here they had a huge crowd and being entertained, and the person that was entertaining them was Jenny Lind, and Jenny Lind happened to be the best known, well appreciated opera star, singing star in the world at that time. I'm not sure who you could compare her to in these days, but she was very, you can see that not an empty seat in the place. And this is Castle Garden, or was to become Castle Garden. So here it's becoming Castle Garden, and they're putting in the different sections of Castle Garden. Now they have a section where you pick up your tickets. This is a ticket, and the ticket, it can be a ship ticket, or it can be a ticket for a railroad or a canal or other means of transportation. This one here happens to be a combined ticket that you can see it covers being transported by train, boat, and another form of train. I imagine that that's what the kind of ticket that I had as Christopher Turner traveling, because where I'm going to head is once I get to Castle Garden, I'm going to get myself a job, and then I'm going to head west. I'm going to get a little food to eat at the bread stand. And I'm going to leave my bags here in the baggage area, well, the baggage room, while I get all my accommodations situated. Also here at Castle Garden is where you might arrange to meet with other people that you knew. So in this case, this husband had gone over some years ago to America, and then he was here meeting his wife and children and mother-in-law who came over later. So he was so glad to see them. And here's a family that doesn't look particularly happy because they're still waiting for those people that they're supposed to meet. They're still waiting for them. For those people that have made those arrangements, now they come over here, and this is the place to exchange your money. So you came over with Irish money, and Irish money isn't worth much, but you were able to exchange it for the fair rate of money in America. These happen to be Mormons, a group of Mormons that came over from Europe, from Netherlands, and arrived at Castle Garden. So you had a variety of different people, not just the Irish, but you had Germans and Mormons and a variety of other people that came over to immigrate to America. And believe me, when they got over here, many of them were just so happy to finally reach land. We just weren't sure, with all the number of people that were dying on the ships and everything else, that they'd make it. So here they're just in a big celebration with the accordions and dancing and singing. And then again, you have this young man who's just not sure where he's going to end up with. You did have a workhouse there, and so a number of these people that came here ended up in the workhouse. But you had families that had made it successfully over here and were looking forward to a new life and a new career. And young mothers. These are runners. Now, these are not nice people. The runners are scallywags. They are young men, often of the same ethnicity as you are, and they would come up to you and promise you that they would find you a place to stay for the night and for accommodations for your luggage, and just everything, get you set for tickets and all. And in fact, they're really ripping you off. They're not good people. Now, because of the runners and other people that weren't such good people, they established the Irish Immigrant Society, the German Immigrant Society, and a number of other organizations that were set up entirely to safeguard and help the recently arrived immigrants, show them where to go, how to get there. Here's a guy that's buying a ticket on the railroad. There was some question as to whether it was cheaper to buy a ticket inside or outside of Castle Garden, and they actually had a federal investigation to decide whether to investigate whether it was cheaper or not. Now this one here, it looks like an innocent picture, but when you look at the gentleman to the far right, you can see that he's reaching into that woman's pocketbook and grabbing things out of it, snatching things there. So you had a combination of good and bad people there right there at the labor exchange. Now the labor exchange, the way it operated is there were people there that were looking for jobs, newly arrived immigrants that were looking for jobs. And then there were people that wanted laborers, wanted people to work for them in a job. Like, let's say you had a farmer out in the Midwest that needed some help. Well, he could come here or send somebody here as his representative and advertise that he had a job available, and get hooked up with this person that wanted a job. And that's the way it was with my great grandfather, with Christopher, is that he was looking for a job. He was an uneducated agricultural immigrant, and he really basically wanted the basic job to work just to make some money and live. And he got hooked up with a gentleman from Illinois who had just such a job of helping him around the farm, digging ditches, doing other kind of manual work. And so with that, he got hooked up with him. And when through the labor exchange, the man that wanted the labor paid all the travel, the train, the ship, the canal, any kind of travel that happened to be, he would pay for the immigrant. Now, young ladies were particularly wanted for help or for labor, but not necessarily in a real good way. During they were advertised for help in sewing in areas during the day. So they'd come over and work those sewing circles during the day. And then at night, they would entertain the men. They had medical facilities there. If you were ill or needed some medical attention, you could go over to Ward Island and stay there as long as you needed to and receive medical attention. Generally, when you pulled into the harbor, before you came on on deck here, the medical group would actually send out a medical commissioner that would inspect the ship, inspect all the passengers on there to make sure that you were healthy. If you weren't, they'd send you over to Ward Island to have treatment. Here's an indication of the numbers of people that immigrated in 1851, which is roughly the time that my great-great-grandfather came over. And you can see that the vast majority of them were from Ireland. A number of them were from Germany. Irish people tended to come over singularly. German people came over as their large families. The Germans were more educated and tended to get the better jobs like watchmaking and those kind of jobs, but there weren't near as many of them. So once you had those educated jobs filled in New York City, they were pretty much out of luck. People would generally just kind of crash there, as they were exhausted and just slept wherever they could find a place to sleep. Once they got to New York, they'd look for a place to live, and oftentimes there were some homes that they could live at for pay a fee, but oftentimes they would get hooked up into a tenement house, and I've heard as many as 10 or 20 people living in a single tenement house. Single bathroom, not very good accommodations. What people often did when they got to New York is if they had some leftover money, sometimes they would put it in an envelope and send it back to their relatives with the hope their relatives soon would accommodate or accumulate enough money that they could come over to America as well. They'd send letters that oftentimes were glowing letters saying what a wonderful place America is. Streets are gold, just fantastic place. When in fact it really wasn't that way. But they didn't want the people over back in Ireland to think that maybe those people that immigrated weren't so smart to come on over here. Well, our friend Christopher, he got with that guy with the job. He hooked himself up a trip on a boat, on a steamer, going up the Hudson River from New York. It was beautiful scenery, the Palisades on the one side. And then once they got up to Troy, they switched transportation. They got off the ship and they switched to the Erie Canal, took the Erie Canal across New York State. across the aqueduct at Rochester. When they'd often ride on the top of the canal boat, but they had to be really careful because often the canal boat wasn't that much taller than the little bridges across the canal. So oftentimes they'd have to jump across or jump on the side of the canal to make it safely. And I remember those times riding the canal. It was very quiet and peaceful. We'd go through the various different locks. Once we got to the western end of New York on the canal, we got off of it and got on to another steamer that took us across the Great Lakes, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. We actually got on the boat at Buffalo there at the beginning of Lake Erie, and so we got on there and we took the canal boat, or took the steamer on Lake Erie, crossed Lake Huron, and then to Lake Michigan. Near, got off of the steamer at Lake Michigan and got on to another boat at Illinois, and took it down the Illinois waterway. These are the kind of ships that we took going across the Great Lakes. And this is a picture of one of the locks on the Illinois waterway. It was really the formal name of it's Illinois Michigan Canal. And it kind of peters out and turns into the Illinois River. That's what you have here. You get down to about Virginia, Illinois, or Bairdstown, Illinois, and you get off there, off the ship, and you're getting close to where your final destination is. You travel by foot, or maybe you can find a buggy or something to go by that takes you to Little Indian, Illinois. Little Indian was the town that I was destined to reach, and it was there outside of Little Indian in farmland that I found the house where my future employer lived in. I came up and introduced myself and that I was ready to work for him. He had a wonderful house, and I worked for him for several years. And then in 1863, where the Civil War had already been going for a few years, and so I was drafted as a member of the 99th Illinois Infantry to go fight in the war. So I went off to the war. Tell you the truth, fighting war is not something I get a lot of joy out of. I get a lot more joy out of digging ditches and working on the farm than I do the fighting the war. But I fought the war. Towards the end of the war, we had one instance where we had to go on the double quick. That was to run really quickly. And that exhausted me, and with the heat of the summer and everything else, and I basically passed out and became very sick, and was taken to the hospital, the medical hospital, and didn't really recover very well for the rest of the war, but lasted until the end. And in the end, we were mustered out in New Orleans, and I headed home. Well, I decided that, I saw a poster. And this poster talked about the really rich agricultural land out in the Platte River Valley, and that was available for the taking. And I decided I just might try that kind of deal. So I headed on out, took leave of my job there in Illinois, and headed on out to the Platte River Valley, which cut right across Nebraska. So took a ship until I got to the Mississippi River and the Missouri River, and got on the Transcontinental Railroad there at Omaha. And at Omaha, got on the railroad and took it across the state of Nebraska until I got to Hall County, which was Platte or Grand Island. And I got off there and went to the land office to see about getting some land. And they said, yeah, there's some land available. I could homestead it, and for a little bit of money. But one thing I had to do is I had to live there for 5 years, and I had to improve the land. I had to build a house, and I had to improve that land. So what I did is I stayed there for 5 years, and while I was staying there, I built a mud kind of a mud house to live in. And then I also planted trees as my means of improving the land. Now I was supposed to plant 3,000 trees, but I ended up only planting 300. Now I don't know if that made a difference or whatever, but after a while I decided that was enough for me, and I headed back east. And I'm headed back east as far as Seward County in Seward, Nebraska, which is on the southeastern part of the state. And I found me a girl named Matilda that I became real fond of, and we married there in Seward, and built ourselves a house, and there's where my land is in Hall County. And that's Seward, Nebraska. That's the way it looked at that time. Small little town. And there's Matilda. There's my dear Matilda. We built ourselves this house here, and that house, I can tell you, that house stands until today. And this is where the story ends. Is Christopher Turner died in 1905, and he's buried there in the Seward County Cemetery, and I happen to go and visit his grave and his home every time I have a chance to get out there to Nebraska, where my mama lives. So that's the story of Christopher Turner's travels from Ireland to America. And you can see he traveled about every kind of means of travel you can have, from a ship to a canal boat to a train, just every kind of way you can get there. And he persevered, and lived a good life. So with that, I think I'll stop and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, John. That was fascinating. Yay, we're clapping here. That was awesome. So
Thank
let
you.
me check the chat. No questions from Zoom land just yet. Here we have a question here at
What was the
Run.
primary cause or one of the causes of the Great Famine in Ireland?
The question was, what was the main cause of the potato famine in Ireland? Was it the blight?
Yeah, it was the blight. There was a blight that went around, and like I say, it actually covered more. It covered all of Ireland, but it covered England and it covered Scotland. It covered a lot of more places than what the average person thinks that the Irish potato famine hit. And also, I'd say is it covered more times than the average person thinks. It actually had been over a number of different years, just not as bad. I do have to tell you a story. I forgot to tell you that, during the blight, these countries were trying to think about what to do. It's like nowadays with Ukraine, we're trying to figure out what to do. Well, there in those days, America was trying to figure out what we could do to help the Irish in their blight. And so what we decided to do is we'd send them corn, and so they could eat the corn. Well, they tried the corn. No, they didn't eat the corn at all, because they felt like that the corn was something you'd feed animals and slaves. The corn just wasn't an appropriate food for an Irishman. So then America said, well, gee, what else can we do? We'll send them rice. And America sent them rice, and they didn't know how to cook rice. So what they did is they took the rice, put it in a pot, and boiled the rice until it turned to a mush. And when they boiled it to a mush and then ate it, it made them sick and throw up and everything. So they decided, well, maybe evidently boiling rice isn't the way to do it. We'll just eat it raw. And they ate the rice raw. And that made them sick as well. So they quit doing that. And so basically they would go for months starving to death rather than eating that stuff that had been sent to them.
Was the blight a bacteria or a fungus or an insect?
It was a fungus, I believe.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Yeah, and it infected things, down to where when, of course, the potatoes are underground, and sometimes you couldn't exactly tell how good the potatoes were doing, and you dig them up and it was just all black and smelly and rotten.
Thank you for that. We have some excellent questions in the chat. The first of those is from Carol. I know in Boston, places had signs saying no dogs or Irish. Mm-hmm. What caused such bias against the Irish in particular?
Well, the Irish weren't thought very well of anywhere, anytime. And I think they brought a lot of that bias over from Ireland to America. I don't know of a particular reason. I've heard that, like a Black Irish, you hear about Black Irish. Well, you always try to have somebody that's worse off than you. So, they always thought, well, at least, if you can't be as bad as a Black, you can be as bad as an Irishman. So I just think it's just natural inclination for people to want to find somebody bad or somebody that's worse than them. I don't know of a particular reason.
Okay, thank you. We have another great question. Do you know what ship your ancestor took and what city he departed from?
I do not. That is something that I've been trying to find. Supposedly, the shipmasters kept a log of all the people that came on the ships, but then just in the last couple of days, I was at a Irish genealogy session where we talked some about this, and evidently many of those ship records were lost, were burned. So I do not know what ship he was on, and I don't know, you know, exactly. I know approximately when he came over, which is 1858, but that's as exact as I can get.
We have one of our Zoom people is commiserating, same problem here, that they can't find the ship. I was curious, your ancestor came to New York through Castle Garden, but there are certainly other ports, and Boston would be one of the most notable ones that Irish emigrated to. What was the proportion maybe of Irish people who came to New York versus Boston or other ports? Were they mostly to New York or to other places?
Well, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I do remember that the majority of the people came to New York. But a high percentage of people also came to Boston. You could probably go at saying New York is the highest, Boston is the second, Philadelphia is the next, maybe Baltimore or whatever would be the next. You know, there were a number of different ports, but New York was the biggest one.
Okay, we have a participant in the chat who's noticing that her ancestor came through Baltimore. So yeah, a bunch of different places they could have come from, but
that's
New York,
correct.
it sounds like the most. So let me look this way and see if we have anybody here in person who has a question.
How old was his ancestor when he came in?
How old was your ancestor when he came to the US?
He would have been about 35 years old.
Oh, so he was older, yeah.
He was older, yeah. By and large, the people that came over were more in their teens or 20s. Yeah. It really does get to the point where, you know, you've entered into the, you know, you've gotten old enough that you've gotten a job, you're doing some kind of work and whatever, and then to stop that, get on a ship, come over to a land that you know nothing about and try to find a job is really difficult. So if you have any kind of a job at all that they're in Ireland, the chances are you're going to stay there. And it really comes down to the religious persecution, the Irish potato famine. The other thing is that your landlords, it was all a landlord kind of a system, and the landlords could kick you off at any time. There was a landlord, and this is a man that you might have heard of. Let's see, his name, if I can remember it, it's been a long number of years since I thought about him. Oh gosh, now I can't think of his name, but he was a man that was well liked and everything else, and he took good care of his indenture, of his people. See, people could just settle there on your land. You know, they didn't even have to necessarily be renters or anything else. They're just settlers. They just settle on your land, and the landlord has to pay the state a certain amount of money for each person. And what he decided one year, he was thinking about it, he says, you know, I can send all these people there, to America, pay their way over to America on the ship, which was about $15 a person, and get rid of them once and for all cheaper than I can pay what I have to pay the state every year to have them be on my land. So that was true, and he sent them over to America. Now, when they showed up in America, they were in rags and nearly naked and very poor condition, but at least he'd gotten rid of them.
A lot of heads shaking no here in the audience. Hard to believe people could be treated like that, but yeah, I guess so.
Well, you know, and I'll just add this a little bit out of context, but you know, I watch a lot of news, and I'm watching a lot of things with Ukraine, and I see these millions, like I think we're up to 3 million people that have left Ukraine now, trying to get out, and I see those people in the basements and in all these different places, and I think about, that's not that much different. Here's all these people from a variety of different backgrounds crammed together, trying to get away from the enemy. And that's really, in many ways, the way it was with the Irish.
Yeah, definitely a parallel, no question. Definitely, where you just escaped with nothing but your life and the clothes on your back.
Exactly.
If you were that lucky, if you were that lucky to escape.
Exactly. Landau is the man's name that, and there's the Landau that's out here in Loudoun County. That's a home, that's a nice subdivision, Landau. And I wondered how many people really realized that land there, that property out there, was named after this Irish landlord that wasn't maybe so nice to his people.
Other questions from here? Yes.
When you talk about the women that worked, I guess, in the sweatshops, factories, and then, quote, at night they entertained men, were they prostitutes? Is that what he's saying? Or?
Yes, we have a question whether the women entertaining the men were prostitutes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they were. And you know, you do what you have to do, and most of them, they got sucked into doing that evening job and working in these homes. And sometimes the homes would be pretty nice homes that they'd get to work in, and then over time, you know, they get kind of worn out, and they'd end up being on the streets and basically working as hookers. You know, where you carry your mat around with you, and if you need to, you lay it down on the ground and use it, and then pick it back up and go on your way.
Okay, wow. We have another question here at Lebanon.
It's not really a question. I guess I'm going to defend a lot of Irish women who traveled over to America. I have a great grandmother who arrived at age 14 in 1865, who worked as a maid. I know as a class of people, those young Irish women sent more money back than any other group of people to their people back in Ireland to survive. And I also just want to say, so I don't think, I'm sitting with a group of women, I don't think any woman ever selects prostitution as a second job unless it's absolutely necessary to feed their children. But lastly, I also want to say is, for a lot of Irish people, we still feel that we were starved out. And a lot of historians will say today that prior to the Holocaust, what the British did during the famine, the potato famine, was to make sure that the Irish Catholic was killed off. And while tons and tons of wheat and everything else that was made within miles of their own home was sent across to Europe. So I just have to say that this was an extermination of people, and the English have never apologized, and that's why we say we will never forget, because it can happen again, and we're watching it happen again over and over. But I just wanted to speak up that
Well, and
you
and
that
that's-
word a little lightly for me. But I appreciate everything you've been saying.
And that's very appropriate. That's very true what you just said. See, the thing about you're exactly right when you say about the English exporting food from Ireland to other places during this event. They were doing that, and that's what made it really bad. Is like, here's all this food that the English are shipping out, and the British are, I mean, the Irish are starving to death. So that was very true. Now, one thing that ties into that is Ireland is an island. It's surrounded by water. That water has lots and lots of fish. They could have fished for food. They would have done that, but I have read that basically their nets and their fishing material now was just destroyed. You know, it was just bad shape, and they couldn't use it anymore. So that's why they didn't fish.
Wow.
But
You
I
have
think that's
agreement? I'm
an
sorry.
interesting, well, that's just an interesting thing to think about, the fact that here was all this fish, cod and other kind of fish, very edible fish that was available there if they only could have gotten to it.
Mm. Any other questions here? And you did have agreement from someone in the chat who agreed it was genocide.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me just,
Here too.
yes,
I think you have different opinions on it.
yes,
I
well,
want to look at the facts.
okay, we have different points of view. And I guess, yeah, I'm sorry, John, you have something to say.
No, I don't. I'm anxious to hear the other point of view.
Okay. And this will be the last question because we have gone over, but I want to give you the opportunity, of course.
I don't want
Okay, we would prefer not to go into it, so that's
Oh,
fine.
Oh, gee. I was anxious.
Almost, but
Oh, yeah, I was anxious to hear that. No, it's really tough, and I have to say, just as a historian, I'm out of character now, and I'm just a historian, is that as I read about this, it's a hard time. There was hard times for those people that came over here and came over to what they didn't know what it was going to be, and leaving their homes and leaving their families and their loved ones buried underneath the turf, and just hard times.
yeah, desperate times, I think.
Well, I wish
Okay,
my grandfather died in 1905, I believe it was, and my grandmother who was his daughter, she lived for a number of years to where I knew her very, very well, and but I didn't make the connection between her and my great grandfather being Irish and being a Civil War soldier and all this kind of stuff. And I look back now and wish I would have processed that, and I could have talked to her about his life and everything else. You know, that's some of genealogy where you got to talk to people while they're still around, because you might not get the chance.
absolutely. I think we can all relate to that, wishing we had gotten more information while our loved ones were still around. On that note, I'm going to thank you very, very much, John.
Thank you.
This was
Thank you.
fabulous. I really appreciate it. It was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing this story and bringing it alive to us, especially on St. Patrick's Day. And thank you to, yes, we have a thank you from the chat. Thank you to people in Zoom land, and thank you to the people in Lover Run. And in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, I have a saying to share with all of you in good spirit. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft upon your fields, and until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of God's hand. Oh, here we have an old Irish recipe for longevity. Leave the table hungry, leave the bed sleepy. Lots of sayings, yes. Thank you all. I really appreciate it, John. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care, everybody. Be well.